Can you hear me now? Chuck? I don't believe this is happening. Can you hear me or not?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, we'll start it out then. Okay, as long as we're on
All right.
here, it says we're on. It's not this. Okay, we're going to start. I hope I can hear you. Okay, we're going to start out right now.
Okay.
I apologize to everybody for being late. It wasn't anything that we had to do with it. There was some screw up as far as our backlog was concerned. As far as the setup was concerned, it was set up yesterday, and somebody came on, and somehow they hit the wrong buttons and caused us to be late. I don't like being late, and I apologize for that to everybody, including my guest. But go ahead and bring it around and go ahead and mention a few things. I'm just going to go ahead and mention that what we try to do here on Mariner Spirit is that this is a sort of a paranormal show that deals with an interviewing of a certain person. And this person tonight happens to be Mr. Charles Williams, who's a good friend of mine. And we're going to go ahead and I'll just mention a few people that I support, and that'll be at Potographs with Tim Miley and PKC out of Florida with Chris Gaskowski and Alex Wilkinson. Next week, we'll go ahead and we'll go through our authors. But I want to bring Chuck. Chuck's on here already, so we're going to go ahead and start to talk right away as long as we were running late, and I apologize. Chuck's been a friend of mine for quite a few years now, and we've all had the opportunity, or I've had the opportunity to work with him on a lot of his documentaries. He's not only a paranormal investigator, but he's a great documentarian, puts a lot of work and effort into it and a lot of thought, and has been very, very good at what he does. He's a writer and director and producer of his own business, PRL Productions, and the documentaries are 1,000 Words, which is basically Bachelor's Grove, and that was the first one that we all did, and it was a great event, and it was a great video, and if you get the opportunity to find it and play it and listen to it, it's very, very good. The second one was Science of Mediumship, Project PSI, and that's with a friend of both of ours, Dr. Chuck Kennedy, who has passed recently, and his work has to be remembered, that's for sure. And then The Day the Circus Didn't Come to Town, and that was was it Maggart? Was it the Maggart? Hagenbeck?
Mm-hmm.
Maggart and Hagenbeck train circus, and that was this famous circus train crash from, I want to say, 1917. Something like that.
Was 6 somewhere in there.
Okay, and we did that one, and then there was In Search of Diana Driftwood, and that's a Diana of the Dunes, basically. And that's another one we were involved with, and that was at the Indiana Dunes State Park. And those are the ones that he has been involved with. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to leave it up to him to go ahead and throw it on the table as far as what he would like to go ahead and discuss tonight. I know we had discussed something before, I don't know if you want to stick to it or not. It's up to you. Because we mentioned
Yeah.
a famous, infamous person in the Chicagoland area and around the area. So it's up to you if you want to go ahead and talk about it or not.
Yeah,
Take
sure.
her and run. Take her and run.
Yeah. And I apologize because unfortunately, uh, I had a whole PowerPoint presentation for this, and this is totally my fault. I cannot find it. I don't know what I did with it. It's around somewhere, what device it's on.
Well,
So
you
I'm
know what?
sorry about.
You're going to be on here again. No, no problem that way. I mean, we're not going to end it here. I mean, you're in too important of a person for me to go ahead and just go ahead and shelf you. You know what I mean? You've got a
Yeah,
lot of great things that you've done. You've got accomplishments that some people never even get a chance to dream about, and you've done them. So that's just one of the things I'm going to say. And so if you want to go ahead and start it off with that character that we were all going to go ahead and talk about, go at it. That would be great.
yeah, yeah. We can discuss him. The only thing is, I don't have as many visuals to share with your audience to make it more visually stimulating.
Well, we can go
Um,
back with it. We can go back to it again on the next one if you'd like.
well, no, it's okay. We can go ahead and just forge ahead with this.
Okay.
Um, yeah, we were going to discuss not so much John Wayne Gacy, but more of uh, the victims. And uh, this whole case broke in the 70s. It's so fantastic because here's a guy who, to all outward just looking at him, you think, oh, this is an upstanding citizen. He's been involved with the Democratic Party. He's involved with local politics. He does clown shows for kids. He has these elaborate picnics at his house. Uh, and lo and behold, he turned out to be a serial killer. Um, Now, these young men, aged and there was a whole range of ages. Like some people classified him as like a pedophile, but that's not exactly correct. I think the youngest was 12 or 13, but he went also, some of these guys were up in their 20s. Um, as far as the type of victim I think he went for is Gacy was an average guy. He wasn't a big hulking figure. So I think the type of guy he targeted was someone smaller and more effeminate, and so that he could get the upper hand on them. A couple of the guys that got away, like one was a wrestler, so he had an obvious edge on a non-athletic Gacy. And so he was able to use his strength and knowing how to maneuver to get out and get away from it. But when the whole broke and they started pulling bodies, it was nobody had ever seen that he would store these bodies around his house. And near the end, he started dumping bodies in the river. And when the police asked him about it, he said, "Well, I just ran out of space at the house." So four of these young men were found in the rivers. So it took quite a while to identify these guys because this case broke in the late 70s. And it took a few years because there was no such thing as DNA back then. About the only way they could identify someone was through dental records. So, you know, families came forward and they looked at all the cases that were brought to them of missing young men, and they started asking for dental records and were able to identify a good number of these guys. But at a certain point, they had 9 bodies they couldn't identify. So what they did is they decided to have a burial for these 9 individuals. And there was a undertakers, for lack of a better word, union. They're called the, oh God, they have a long name and I'm probably going to butcher it, but I'm going to try. The Greater Chicago Undertakers Association of Cook County, Illinois. I believe that's the name.
Okay.
So they organized burials for these 9, and they got cemeteries to donate the plots, and they decided to ask different cemeteries in the Chicagoland area so that one cemetery wouldn't be burdened with the whole price of all these plots. They paid for a casket, flowers, and a headstone, a simple headstone. And I have some visuals. I'll just hold them up to the camera so people can see those. The ceremony was held at Oak Ridge Glen Oak Cemetery. This is the caskets lined up before the ceremony in a staging area at the mausoleum there.
So these are these the ones that are unnamed?
Right. These are the unknowns.
Okay.
And,
so now originally there were 30, weren't there 30 that they had? I think you had mentioned something like 30, you know, before they really got to the end. As far as identifying
I believe there was 31 to 33. And of those, there were these 9 individuals they couldn't identify.
Okay.
So
there's no markings on the tombstones, right?
Yeah. I'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
This is a picture of the mausoleum, and the caskets were fanned out in like a semicircle. I think the coroner, you know, here's a better close-up picture. And I believe this is the coroner about ready to address the small crowd.
And once again, it's people, it's caskets of unidentified individuals that were found because of John Wayne Casey.
Yep.
So go ahead.
They took them to the different cemeteries. A funeral director went with them, a priest or rabbi, and they buried them. And here's a picture of the tombstones that was eventually placed there. It's a very simple stone. It shows what looks like an open Bible, and all it says is "we remembered." And the date they were buried, June 12th, 1981. So like I said, these cases happened, this came out in the late 70s, but it took until this long for them to say, okay, we can't find out who you guys are.
That's because they didn't have any DNA or anything like that back in the day, right?
Exactly. So the first one to be identified was in about 1978. And there was a reporter for Channel 7 named Russ Meyer. Some of you guys might remember him. And he got involved with this. And there was a family in around Omaha, Nebraska that was saying, hey, we were looking for our son and we submitted these dental records. And when Russ approached the sheriff's office, they're like, no, we never got any dental records from them. So what they did is did a little investigating, and the family had left it up to one of their aunts. And the aunt said, okay, I'll take care of it. I'll send off the dental records. Well, she never did.
Oh, God.
She thought the family had too much grief, and she wanted to spare them anymore. Well, they were like, we want to know one way or another. So he did some more digging. He got in contact with a distant relative. And I think he had spent a little time in Florida visiting that relative. And lo and behold, that relative had some dental records. So he got them to the Cook County Sheriff, and boom, they identified the first one. So they dug him up, and they gave the remains back to the family. And now the family lived in Iowa, right there on the border. But his father was buried in Omaha, so they decided to bury him next to his father. So he's about the furthest victim away from this area. Now, so so that left 8. Now these guys were left basically unidentified until the advent, and eventually the Cook County Sheriff, now Tom Dart, said, hey, maybe we can do something with this and find some of these guys. So they put out a plea to the public. hey, if you had anyone who went missing in the late 70s, you know, and if you want to supply us with a DNA sample, please do that. So people start submitting them, and they get a hit on one, and they get in contact with his sister, who is now living in Texas, and they find out that he's the one buried. He was buried at Resurrection Cemetery. So they contact her, and they get him his own tombstone. So if you went to the cemetery, you can eventually find his resting place now. And his sister said it's really ironic because we have other relatives buried in that cemetery, and we've been coming there all this time, not knowing that he was there.
Wow.
So, yeah, so he was the first one. So a year or two goes by, and this one guy, I believe they were in Michigan or Minnesota, and they said, yeah, we had an uncle who went missing. Of course, he was a lot younger then, around that time, and they always wondered what had happened to him. And his nephew sent in some DNA, and boom, that was a hit. And he was the one buried at Woodlawn. And his name was Jimmy Haxon, and his name is fresh in my memory. So they eventually had a little ceremony out there, and they got him his own stone. So some time went by and nothing was happening. They didn't have any more hits. So the sheriff said, well, let's try something different. And they approached one of those family tree sites where people look up their lineage. And, you know, they do the DNA testing now. And they said, hey, we're not trying to catch a criminal. We're looking to identify these victims. We don't know who they are of John Wayne Gacy. So the company said, okay, you can go through our records and see if anybody who has supplied blood has had a match to any of your victims. And lo and behold, they found somebody. And this woman had submitted her DNA, and this guy was a relative of hers. And I should get down. Sorry. Cats jump. But I think he originally lived in Pennsylvania, and he got married. They moved to New York, and they were only together 2 or 3 years, and they got a divorce, and he moved to Chicago, started working in a bar, and sometime in there he met Gacy, and that was his fate. And that is Francis Alexander. And we'll talk more at length on him later. But lo and behold, he was the one buried at Oak Ridge Glen Oak Cemetery. And now his grave still has an unidentified marker, and we'll talk more on that later.
Okay.
So fast forward, okay, so that left us with 5 unknown bodies. The one they originally found, 3 that are known now. So that leaves us with 5 unknowns. So fast forward somewhere in the late 90s, I took a cemetery tour that was headed by the Huff sister, Judy Huff, who took the famous picture at Bachelor's Grove, and her sister Mary, who's a member of Ghost Research Society like I am. And one of the places we was Glen Oak Cemetery, and of course they talked about that tragic fire in Chicago at the parochial school where
Our Lady of
school
the
children
Angels.
had died in a fire. Yeah, because there's a mass grave there. And in fact, Jim Piscopo, who you know, who used to be a part of the group, one of his relatives were one of those kids.
You got to be kidding. I didn't know that.
No. Yeah. So if you go there and look at the list of victims, there's a Piscopo, and that's his relative.
Holy cow.
So yeah, you know, and that cemetery tour, we went to different cemeteries. We stopped at that one. You know, she pointed out famous, infamous graves. And we came to that tombstone I had showed you that we remembered. And she told us the story about the excuse me, the unknown Gacy victims. So when she got, I'm sorry, one second. Sorry about that, getting a little dry.
That's okay. That's okay.
But she, dear me. Jesus Christ. Lord.
Took it down the wrong pipe.
I don't know. But when she talked, know where the other victims are buried, and she says no. Well, that got me started. That got me started on this whole thing, finding out more information about the Gacy victims. So at first I started cataloging all the information I could find on these guys and trying to find where they were buried. And in doing research, I came across articles at the day when they had that mass burial of those guys across the city, and that Undertakers Union. And I can halfway see their point. They wanted to keep it anonymous, keep all the information about where they were buried, because in their terms, they didn't want it to turn into a bizarre tourist attraction.
Right. Or people digging people up kind of thing, right?
Yeah, you know, there's always one or two nuts in the crowd. You never know what's going to happen. But so I started, you know, like I found out where all the known victims were buried. you know, in my research, 3 of them were cremated. The rest have different burial sites. There's some buried out of state, and I'm going to refer to my list here. Sorry. The guy in Omaha, which we talked about. There's a guy in Eastwood, Michigan. There's a victim in Maryville, Tennessee. It's just because, you know, their bodies were sent where their relatives were. There's one guy in Sunman, Indiana. And there's one guy we'll bring up near the end of this who I couldn't find any information on at all. And they all have different burial situations depending on their life situations. You know, some are in mausoleums, some are buried in the ground. Some have nice big fancy stones and some have modest. So that got me started on, well, where the hell are these unknown? Now, the first guy who was disinterred and moved to Omaha, the only closeness I can find to where his grave was, it said he was buried in a West suburban cemetery. No other information could be found. Now, if we did find out where he was buried and went there, there wouldn't be anything there, of course. But that's just one of those things that stick in my head. I'd like to know. But I started working around the information that I had to try to find out where these graves were. And I started kind of an unofficial group of people, and I believe you're in that group. I called it Unknown Finders, and it was just fellow ghost hunters, different people who had an interest in this subject and wanted to donate their time when they could to help me find these guys. So we did have some clues. Jason Moran, who's now a commander with the Cook County Sheriff's Office, he works all cold cases for them, and he's assigned all these Gacy cases. And he did some interviews when they started doing the DNA tests. And one of the clues we had is they had some good DNA samples. They had about 4 good DNA samples, but they had to exhume these guys and get better DNA samples on some of them than what they had. And this newspaper article said the ones they exhumed was Resurrection, which we know they found that guy, so you can cross that one off the list. Woodlawn, they figured out who he was, so you can cross that off the list. And 2 we didn't know of, Mary Hill and Queen of Heaven. So, okay. So, cut a long story short, we started looking at Woodlawn and Resurrection to try to find the 2 unknowns there. And Jim, oh God, I'm drawing a blank on his name. He used to be part of GRS, and he wrote a couple of books for Dale. Do you know who I'm talking about?
I do, but I can't think of his name.
Oh, forgive me.
That's
But
okay.
me and him were talking, and we were at Resurrection, and he said, "You know, they identified this guy, right?" And I was like, "Oh my God, I didn't put the two together." So I'm like, "Okay." So then we went in earnest and found out the information of these guys' names and looked up our resources. Now, Woodlawn, I went into the office and they told me right where he was. So boom, I found him. Okay, there he is. But Resurrection, he's not listed in their database. So I had to go through some other ways to find him. And I think I found information for him on Find a Grave, which is a good resource if you're doing this kind of work. And so we went out there in the late fall, and there were leaves everywhere. And his section was the last one we looked at, but we were looking for an unknown. You know, if we would have figured out sooner, we might have found him at that time. But okay, so we had those two. So in the newspaper articles, I'll pull out some pictures. I got my research binder here. Let me find the pictures I'm going to reference.
The amazing thing about this too is also the fact that these cemeteries that Chuck and the crew were at on the south side are just unbelievable cemeteries. They just go and go and go and go and go.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
a ton of people. There's
Yeah.
tons of people in there.
Yeah.
And you would take take a
unfortunate,
section and cordon it off and check it all out and then check it
yeah,
off and then go to the next one.
yeah. But we would put boots on the ground and walk each row. And unfortunately, we walked the whole of Woodlawn before we got wise and the light bulb went off and said, "Oh, he's an identified." But this was a picture of the Queen of Heaven in a newspaper article. So this was our clue. So I had to find a plot that had similar stones.
That had what?
And
You were breaking up there.
Stones.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's hard to tell with me holding the picture up, but there's a stone I call the Empire State Building stone because from a distance it looks like the Empire State Building. There's a two-tone stone which has a big vertical column, and there's a monolithic stone with two vases, and at the top of the monolith it has a curve, looks like a bite's taken out of it. So once I found that, and I'm like, okay, there's the familiar stones, then it was just pinpointing where that flat to the ground we remembered stone was.
Wow.
So pacing around, doing the footwork, we found it. And our other one was Maryhill.
And these are all cemeteries on the south side, correct?
No,
there are Mary Hills up north.
Yeah. And here's a picture that was in the paper of Maryhill. And that's Detective Moran standing by the grave, pointing at it as they are exhuming it. And there's some visual clues in this. You can tell this plot is close to the main street because there's like an apartment building, and you can see a short, squatty white house there. Now there's a fence back there, a cemetery fence. There's a plot that goes along that fence. Then there's a cemetery road because you can see cars parked on it. And then the plot where he's buried. So that's what we had to go on. So Mary Huff was with me that day, just me and her. And we found the area. It looks like an apartment building was built in the 60s or 70s. It has that kind of flavor to it. And we found the short, squatty house. So we had a rough idea where so then it was just finding him. And she was the one that found him that day. So I said, okay, I owe you a dinner somewhere. So then we had 2 of our 5. So we had 3 we didn't know where they were. So one night I was at work. I work nights. And I was fiddling around on the internet, and I found a site this guy has called Faces of the Forgotten. And he'll basically do little videos where he'll show pictures of the person and tell their story. And okay, we're at his grave. Here it is. And he had like 3 videos on Gacy. So this one they were at, let's see, I'm trying to get my story straight. Let me pull out my visual aid.
You could be, that's so hard to remember all that. And you got 18,000 different things.
Okay. The video they had was Irving Park Cemetery. And that's way up north. Or no, I'm sorry. Jesus Christ. Rose Hill.
Rose Hill?
That's a cemetery. A shed from the Shed Museum. The aquarium's buried there. Oscar Mayer.
The big cemetery.
The Hall guy. Yeah, you name it. Now, they have a little annex across the street, which is another little cemetery that's part of Rose Hill. And they were in that little annex section. And there's actually 3 known victims of Gacy buried there. So they were talking about each one. And he's like, okay, let's walk a little bit further down the way. And they walked along the gate, and boom, there's another unknown stone. So right after work, bright and early in the morning, I jump in my car like the Batmobile and boom, go up to Rose Hill, find those 3 guys, and then boom, there's the unknown. So then we just had 2. So believe it or not, the next night I'm at work again, and I'm looking at Flickr. And this guy is putting up true crime photos, like stuff of Capone and you name it. and he had some shots of things related to Gacy. And he's like, okay, here's an unknown stone at Irving Park Cemetery. And I'm like, what? I didn't know about that. So the very next morning, here I go again, jump in my car like it's the Batmobile. Boom. I'm at Irving Park. Now, he had the section mislabeled on his.
Oh, no.
Park is not a huge cemetery, but he had it mislabeled. And I'm like, well, damn, where did, not in this section. I looked all through it because I had his picture and I could pick out visual clues, and I'm like, nothing looks right. So I just pull up to the next section and I'm like, wait a minute, this looks more like his picture. So I get out and start walking around, and boom, there it is. So he was in the ballpark, just not behind home plate. So now we're down to one. Some time goes by, can't find any clues. And by the way, I called that Undertakers Union that I mentioned before. I'm like, well, these guys have to know. And the guy I talked to, the current president, he's a very nice guy. And he's a current undertaker himself. And he told me, well, you know, this organization has passed hands quite a few times, and we don't have that many records from back then. Excuse me. So I said, well, isn't it ironic? You guys bought these guys tombstones that say we remembered, and you guys can't remember where you buried them? He's like, yeah, that is. So, you know, I just, you know, quite a few, maybe a year or so went by, and Mary Huff again, she said, hey, Chuck, check out this website or this Facebook page. It was called Famous Graves. And basically random people would just go to somewhere and, hey, here's Colonel Sanders' grave. Hey, here's Elvis's grave, you know, things like that. Well, this one guy had a picture of one of the unknown stones, and he talked about it a little bit. And I was reading the comments, and one of the guys who commented said, hey, I used to be an undertaker. I'm retired. But I was at the burial of the unknowns, and I went to one of those cemeteries. So I said, I need to talk to this guy. Now I said, knowing my luck, he probably went to one of the cemeteries I already know about. But get this, he didn't. He went to one that wasn't even on my radar, Mount Hope Cemetery. It's on the far south side by Alsip.
Okay.
In fact, it's like on damn near out of the city. So I went to the Mount Hope Cemetery office. They know nothing about this. So I try to contact him on Facebook, and he starts a dialogue with me. And he's like, yeah, that was so long ago, I don't remember where he was buried. But I sent him a map, and I said, just see if anything looks familiar to you, and just try to guess. And he picked out a section in the old section of the cemetery. So I said, okay. I went there, walked it all, couldn't find him. So he's like, yeah, I'm sorry, but I just don't remember. So my first thought was like I had with the Undertakers Union. do these guys really know where these plots are and they're still trying to keep up that veil of secrecy? Or do they legitimately not know where they are? So I approach a groundskeeper. He's like, no, man, I've been working here about 6 years. I've never seen that stone. So I just keep up my due diligence and I keep pacing out a plot. I do like a plot a day. Sometimes I go to the new section, sometimes the old section, back and forth. And this one day, eventually, I go to the new section, and it was a sunny day. It was kind of warm. So I'm like, let me try to find a tree to park my car under. And the first side I drive down didn't have any trees, but the other side did. So I come around and I park to the tree closest to the end of the rows. And I start walking back to the end of the plot. And now this cemetery has a lot of those flat to the ground Bible stones. That's a popular motif. So I see one and it has the Bible motif, and I'm like, okay, don't get excited. There's a million of these in this cemetery. And I get a little closer and I'm like, hey, there's not much writing on it. Because you remember, all it says is we remembered in the date. So I get closer and I'm like, holy shit, that's it.
Wow.
So I called Dr. Chuck because I had Dr. Chuck call the psychics and see if they could be any help. And they really couldn't help pinpoint anything. But he's like, yeah, I knew you'd eventually find it. So there you go, with some due diligence and some good old-fashioned police gumshoe type work. We found all the missing ones, except for just that pesky question of where the first one was buried. I don't really need to know. It's just one of those things in the back of my head. And the other guy, the one I couldn't find any information on his burial, his name was David Talsma. He was a young guy living in Chicago. He'd spent some time in the military. Now, that night, he was supposedly coming to a concert in the old town I lived in, Hammond, Indiana. There was this building, the Civic Center, which used to host circuses and basketball games, you name it, concerts. And he was going to go see. I found a website that listed concerts, if you know the date and all that. So I looked it up, and sure enough, I found it. He was going to see UFO's Lights Out tour. And who was opening up for him was Cheap Trick and a band that's lost to history called the Rockets. But either before he went to the concert or after, he must have bumped into Gacy, and that was it. Now, on Find a Grave, I found some information. His father's buried at Abraham Lincoln Cemetery near Joliet, the military cemetery.
Yeah, the little one, yeah.
So since the time, I called there, and they didn't have him. His mom was buried in Florida. I called that cemetery. No, they didn't have him. He had one brother who's buried in California. I called that cemetery. They don't have him. So you got me. To solve that one, I may have to hire a private eye at some point. But yeah, that's basically the cases
Did
in a
you
nutshell.
did you compile the amount of hours that you guys put in to finding them?
No, I
You know, I knew
didn't.
you spent quite a bit of time. You know, I mean, the Huffs, you know, were there. You know, Piscopo. I couldn't make it down there every time you guys go ahead and tried to get something going down there, and the only thing
Sure,
I
sure.
did was you know, that was crazy, but I
No.
I think
So
that
there I was one out there, tromping up and down the roads. It just depended on when people could make it.
yeah.
Nothing mandatory or anything. Now, one other side note. To this on finding the different grave sites of these guys. There was one I went to, William Carroll, who's buried at a smaller cemetery, kind of not that far from Resurrection, named Mount Glenwood Memory Gardens West. And it's kind of back by the forest preserves. And it's owned by the sister cemetery that's in Dalton. But this one young man, William Carroll, I walked up and down the plot he was supposed to be in, and I found his brother. His brother has a tombstone, but he didn't. So I went to the cemetery office. They did some research. They went out there and pinpointed where his grave was, and they said, yeah, you're right, he doesn't have a stone. They looked all through their records, couldn't find anything. So they allowed me to buy a stone for him. So we, after it was laid out there, we had a little ceremony, and we filmed it. I said some words talking about his short, tragic life. And Christina Rake, she came out and blessed the grave. And so, yeah, we're eventually going to do something with that piece of video, put it on YouTube or something for people to see. And going back to that Francis Alexander, the guy who was at Glen Oak Cemetery who was identified and didn't have a stone. I recently had a meeting in their office, and I said, is there any way I can buy a stone for him like I did this other guy? And they thought about it, and at first they told me no. But then they called the higher ups there, and they said, well, yeah, you can. But what we might do is put it in beside that stone. And I was thinking to myself, well, that don't make too much sense. I said, well, what would I have to do to replace the stone that's there now? They said, well, talk to the people that bought it. Now, normally that would be a tall task, but I know that Undertakers Union did. And they're like, no, we don't have any objection. Just, we would say, try to get the family's input. I'm like, how the hell am I going to do that? So what I did is I called the Cook County Sheriff. They have a website. It's still there. If you think you had a relative who went missing and you think he might have been a Gacy victim, you can submit your blood and see if he's a match and try to figure out who he is. So I called the number that's there, and eventually Commander Moran got back to me, and he said, "Yeah, I worked with that cemetery in the past, and we worked with the family, and we have the funds to buy him a stone, but that cemetery's changed hands, and I've had trouble getting in touch with them." So I gave him the name and number of the people I talked to at the cemetery, and he's going to get in touch with them. And since he has the connection with the family, they're going to try to get him a stone out there. So I may not have to pay for that.
I don't know how the hell you're doing
Which
that. You're spending a lot of money doing that, aren't you?
Well, it's not all that expensive, to be honest. You know, it's under $2,000 to buy one of those little flat to the ground stones.
I was going to say, but if you put anything up, that's an automatic like 4 times that, isn't it?
What do you mean? Like a bigger stone?
If you're talking about putting one that goes up and it has his name and everything, all the information on it. That's like $4 grand. No?
No, one about that size. And it depends with the cemetery and the stone company you work with. But I think they told me it would be about $700 for a stone, like the size he had there. You know, it just depends on who you're working with.
So how did that one that you had me look for, how did that fit into all this?
Yeah, that young guy, like those I mentioned that are out of state. There are some that are out of the area. Let me go through those.
I don't know if that's like
there's one guy. Yeah, there's one guy buried in the small town of Godley, which is down Route 66 outside Joliet.
Wow.
And do you remember the name of that cemetery out there by you? Was that Home Oaks?
No. Huh? Yeah. I think it is.
Yeah, that's Braceville Gardner.
Right.
Yeah.
Not
You see
God.
the time?
Yes.
Are you gonna come up? Right?
Yeah,
We're gonna-
sorry.
That's okay.
The name
We'll continue it again on the next one that we do, and go through everything else and try to make sure. I apologize once again for us running late with the way things were set up. I don't know who played with it, but somebody else that was setting up another show obviously went ahead and made some changes, and that's what screwed us up. Because normally, you know, when I'm ready to go, I'm ready to go. So 9 o'clock is 9 o'clock. But it's a shame that it turned out that way. But I will keep in touch with you. I want to thank you for being on here tonight. It was great information. You know, this is something that a lot of people don't remember anything about, number one, or they don't care. And it's something that
Right.
can't be just, swept underneath the carpet and not worry about what all these people, because they're human beings and they should have been treated fairly.
Right.
So, and I'm
Right.
glad. It's a pleasure that you're a friend of mine and you've taken the time to go ahead and put forth the effort to go ahead and do all this.
Absolutely,
really is.
Greg. My pleasure.
I'm telling you, it's amazing. We've done a lot of things together, but this is something that really, sort of took it over the top. That you're an amazing
Mhm.
you're an amazing person, and I'm just grateful to know you.
Well-
So we'll let everybody
thank
go, and I'll be talking to you tomorrow because I have to get on the road and I have to get back over to the dogs.
All right.
That's part of my job tonight. So thank you very much for being here. Everybody in the chat, thanks again. Charles Williams, if you want to look him up, he's with Ghost Research Society on the south side of Chicago. And if you have any questions or anything for him, you can go ahead and look him up on Facebook. He's on there, and he's really he's one in a million, to say the least. So good night, everybody, and I will see you guys Wednesday for another episode of One Spirit Connect. And Chuck, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for being here, and we'll talk to you later. I'm just going to take care of them, and then I'll say goodbye. Okay, good night, everybody.
All right. Good night.
Join every Wednesday night, same time, same channel, to watch When Spirits Connect with your host, Greg Koss, provided by the Supernatural Inc. Entertainment Network. Thank you, and we'll see you next Wednesday.